right, is everyone ready for our buttercream? Yeah, everything in the oven? All right, feel free to chime in if you you can absolutely use packaged buttercream. Now here's my tip. My tip for packaged buttercream: take it out of the jar, put it in your stand mixer bowl or in a large bowl and hand mixer, whip it up. It's going to add some air in there, get it nice and light and fluffy. It'll almost double the volume of your buttercream, so you'll be able to get more out of it, and it's going to spread a lot more easy. You can also add flavorings to your buttercream, even if it's from a jar. So Chase, you had mentioned cinnamon before. You can add cinnamon to your jar of buttercream or to a regular American buttercream. Can we make frosting without? So Juliet, you can. It just takes a lot of elbow grease, okay? If you do not have a hand mixer, like one of these guys, so this would be your hand mixer, okay? And you put in the whisks. So if you don't have one of these, you don't have a stand mixer, what I would probably do is put it maybe in a food processor and try that. You want to try to avoid having to whisk it up by hand, because you're just not going to be able to get it as light and fluffy as you would by machine. All right, so any kind of machine that you can use to just really, really whip it up is going to be the best. Can we make frosting with, is a blender okay? Yeah, a blender is probably okay. You're just going to have to make sure your butter is soft and do it probably in little bits. So the amounts that I'm giving you, I would cut it in half at least, depending on the volume of your blender. And always, no matter what you're using, make sure you scrape down the sides of your blender, your mixing bowl, to make sure everything's getting in there, okay? Now, the reason I gave you guys such a high number of ingredients here for the buttercream is we are actually gonna be saving this buttercream. We're gonna use it on this cake, but we're also gonna use it for Friday for cake pops. So if you're not planning on joining Friday's cake pop session, you can cut this recipe in half, all right, for the buttercream. Or if you're not sure, buttercream can actually be refrigerated for a really long time. You can also freeze it. All right, so I actually made a batch of, it's called Swiss meringue buttercream last night, and I had a lot of leftover. I stuck it in a Ziploc bag, made it nice and flat so it fit in my freezer really well. And it's gonna stay in there until I'm ready to use it. Bring it up to room temperature, whip it back up, and it's ready to use like it was fresh. All right, so you can freeze buttercream, which is pretty awesome. All right, so I am gonna make this double batch of buttercream. I'm gonna take a full box of butter. I get my butter in these pound packages. Cut it up. This is room temperature butter. If you didn't take your butter out, I would slice it up, put it in a small microwave safe bowl, and just microwave it for just about 20 seconds or so. You don't want it to be melted. You just want it to be soft. And a rule of thumb is your butter is at the right temperature if you poke it and you get a little indentation of your finger, but you can't like poke all the way through the butter without a lot of force. Okay, that's what you're looking for. Our sticks of butter usually have one stick of butter is a half a cup. Okay, so 2 sticks of butter is a full cup. So we're using 2 cups of butter here. Okay. And now I'm going to put it under my stand mixer. I'm looking for this to get really, really light and fluffy. Those are sort of the key words of the day. Light and fluffy. All right. So I'm going to let it run on high speed for just a minute or two. Stop the mixer, scrape down the sides, and let it go again until this butter almost turns a white color. All right. It's going to kind of change color because it's going to get so fluffy. Okay. The butter can be salted or unsalted. It's whatever you have. A lot of bakers actually say they refuse to use unsalted butter. They feel like, adding in the salt really helps cut the sweetness of their dishes. It's up to you. I always use unsalted butter and add in salt later on. Okay? Okay, so I didn't have that on very long, right? Like less than a minute. And I just want to show you what it looks like. So right now it's not light and fluffy yet, but I am noticing that my butter is starting to really stick to the sides of my mixer. So the mixer's not getting everything. So what I want to do is take a moment, stop my mixer, take my spatula, scrape down the sides. Okay. What?
Can we use regular sugar because we don't have enough?
So the reason you typically for an American buttercream want to use confectioner sugar if it's finer grain.
We don't have confectioner
I'm going to tell you how to
We
make
don't
it.
have enough.
I'm going to tell you how to make it. You can make your own confectioner sugar, believe it or not.
Oh.
Okay, I know, I just like blew your
Okay.
mind. So if you take regular sugar and you put it in a blender or a food processor and blend it on up, it's going to grind it down to like more of a confectioner sugar consistency. All right, you're looking
I
for
never knew that.
plumes of sugar smoke coming out of it, and that's just ready to go. All right,
Oh, okay.
the reason we use confectioner sugar for something like an American buttercream is because we're not cooking the sugar down. We want to start out with that really fine, we want to start with that fine granule so we're not tasting and it's not getting grainy. If we were doing something like a Swiss meringue buttercream, that you start with a granulated sugar, the bigger grains, because you're actually going to cook it down so it dissolves the sugar and it's not going to be all grainy. Okay? So does somebody else still have a question?
Yes, how much confectioner sugar should we put?
So if you're using the 4 sticks of butter, so the 2 cups of butter, you're using 8 cups of confectioner sugar. All right, so cut that in half to 4 cups or one pound box if you're cutting this in half. All right, so I'm going to show you what a box of confectioner sugar is. And again, I have to cut my recipe in half because it turns out I only have 1 box. I did not check closely enough. All right, I'm going to take my 1 box of confectioner sugar. This equals about 4 cups. All right, and I'm going to dump it right on in with my butter. Okay, now I used unsalted butter. So I want to add a little bit of salt in here because you do want to cut the sweetness a little bit. I am going to use half a teaspoon of salt. If you're making the full recipe, it's 1 teaspoon. All right, and then 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract or whatever flavoring you want. Again, if you're doubling this, if you're making the full recipe that I sent out, you're using 2 teaspoons. All right, so we're looking at teaspoons here. I'm doing a teaspoon of vanilla. And now I'm going to go grab some milk. You can use whatever milk you have. If you have skim, if you have almond, soy, totally fine. You're just looking for that liquid to add into your buttercream. So I'm going to use whole milk, and I'm going to start with 1 tablespoon. All right, I'm going to repeat myself again. You can always add more, can't really take away. So the goal here is to get it to the consistency that you need for whatever project you want. If you're going to be piping, let's say 3D designs, beautiful buttercream flowers, you want it to be a little bit stiffer, all right? If you're spreading it thin on a cake, you might want it a little bit thinner, all right? So it kind of depends on what you're using this for. I'm going to start with a tablespoon at a time. Start with 1 tablespoon, dump it in the bowl. And now put it back under my stand mixer to incorporate and get nice and fluffy. Did I win the Great Chocolate Showdown? Yes, I did. I actually want to show you what this looks like right now. You're going to want to add, you're going to think that you're going to want to add more milk. Okay, it's really chunky. If I let this just keep going in my mixer, it's going to break down and it's going to get really smooth really quick. If I added too much milk, it becomes, if I add in too much milk and it becomes really liquidy, I can always add a little bit more sugar, okay? So that's how you would kind of combat that. I can't overmix it. All right, so if I just let it go and I go do something with my daughter or go prepare something else, I'm not gonna overmix it at all, which is awesome. Check it out. Okay, look at that, all right? That seems like a pretty good consistency to me. I can put this in separate bowls and add food coloring to it, make it fun colors. If I don't have fancy decorating equipment like a piping bag and piping tips and all that stuff, one of the things that's really cool that a lot of people online have been doing is you take your buttercream, spread it out on a piece of parchment paper and freeze it. Okay, freeze it for about an hour and a half, all right? When the hour and a half is done, you pop it out of the freezer, you take your cookie cutter, you can cut shapes out of it and place that right on your cake with a little bit of fresh buttercream behind it to act as a glue. All right, it's pretty cool. A lot of people on Instagram are doing that right now, and it's really, really neat. Thank you for joining me for this demo on making an American buttercream, and I hope you'll join me again for my live baking demos or here on YouTube and Instagram. See you soon.